I used to believe love was a young person's game. Fast, loud, full of risks you can still afford. Then life taught me routines, solitude, and the comfort of quiet dinners for one. I thought my story with love had already ended. Until the day my doorbell rang and the continuation I never expected stood on my porch, smiling, holding muffins, and accidentally handing me back my heart. I was 61, old enough to know better, young enough to still check my hair in the hallway mirror out of stubborn habit, widowed 9 years. I'd made peace with being the neighbor who feeds stray cats and never changes his playlist. My evenings were predictable: tea, television reruns, same armchair that had my shape memorized. Loneliness had its manners. It knocked softly and left early. Friends told me I should date again. I laughed. At this age, love's a rerun. I already know the ending. And honestly, I believe that. It was a Tuesday, ordinary in every possible way. I'd just burnt toast, again, when the doorbell shattered the quiet. Standing outside, a woman my age, raincoat half-buttoned, holding a plate covered in foil. She said, "Hi, I just moved next door. I'm Nora, and my oven died halfway through baking." I stared, mid-crumb, like an amateur human. She laughed. "Mind if I finish these in yours?" That's how it began, with smoke, cookies, and two strangers sharing the same awkward warmth. While her cookies baked, she looked around my kitchen. "It smells like patience," she said. I smiled. "That's just old furniture." We talked like people who hadn't spoken properly in months. About books no one else remembered. Songs that aged like wine. She'd lost her husband years before, too. Said grief had stopped hurting and just started humming quietly in the background. When the oven dinged, neither of us wanted the timer to be right. She left a few cookies, thanked me twice, and disappeared next door. That should have been the end of it. But love doesn't read endings. It just rewrites in bigger handwriting. 2 days later, another knock. This time, she held coffee instead of cookies. "Peace offering," she said, "for the sugar I borrowed, and the conversation I didn't want to end." We sat by the window while rain rehearsed poetry on the glass. Her laughter had the kind of ease that made decades irrelevant. Halfway through the cup, she said, "You don't talk like someone who's given up." I told her, "That's because giving up doesn't speak. It just sighs a lot." She smiled. "Then maybe I'm allergic to sighing." That line stays in my head, even now. Days started rearranging themselves. Morning walks weren't solitary anymore. We discovered small-town treasures. A bakery that still used handwriting on receipts, a park bench ignoring gravity. She'd tell stories mid-stride about teaching at the local school, about how plants grew better if you scolded them kindly. I'd listen, pretending not to memorize every gesture. Once at sunset, she caught me looking sideways. "You stare like you're surprised I'm real," she said. I replied, "That's because I am." She didn't look away. Neither did I. Of course, fear sneaks in where joy returns. One evening, I asked myself what everyone asks when life hands you another chance. Can I even start again? I thought of wrinkles, medicines, the small tiredness after every long walk. Love needs energy. I only had endurance. The next day, I found a note under my door, her handwriting neat but bold. "You don't have to chase youth to be loved. Walk at your own pace. I'll adjust." I laughed, teared up, then read it 3 more times. By night, I tucked it inside a book, like people my age do with fragile things they're scared to lose. spring drifted in quietly. She invited me to dinner at her place, something grown-ups who trust their ovens do. Her cooking smelled like patience too, but better seasoned. Halfway through soup, the house trembled. Just a small local quake, the kind that shakes shelves but not promises. Dust rained from the ceiling. I looked up. She kept calm. When the tremor stopped, she grinned. See? The world's reminding us to feel alive. We laughed until the neighbors checked if we were all right. That laughter turned strangers into story. Weeks later, we sat on her porch, watching dusk swallow daylight. She said, "My daughter thinks I'm pretending at romance." I asked, "Are we?" She said, "If pretending feels this peaceful, I hope no one wakes me." That was the first time she reached for my hand. It fit awkwardly, perfectly. Two old maps, learning they still connect somewhere. Falling in love later in life is like moving into a furnished house. There are memories already hanging on the walls. We both had them. Names, anniversaries, invisible ghosts who behaved politely during dinner, but slept between us. Instead of avoiding our pasts, we used to talk about them like weather reports. "Today missing him hurts less," she'd say. Then she'd add with a smile, "Tomorrow might rain again, though." Love at our age wasn't about replacing. It was about remembering together without drowning. One afternoon, she slipped on icy steps, sprained her ankle. Hospital visit, plaster, doctor jokes. I stayed the night on her couch because she lived alone. At 2 a.m., she called softly from her bedroom. "Could you check if the heater's still on?" When I walked in, she whispered, "I wasn't cold. Just wanted to be sure someone was still in the next room." That sentence turned every regret I'd ever had into fuel for tenderness. I sat by her bedside until she fell asleep, the ticking kitchen clock counting the rhythm we'd both thought we'd lost forever. Small towns don't whisper. They narrate. People noticed, of course. At the grocery store, "You too look happy." At the post office, "Isn't it lovely, romance at our age?" We laughed it off, but secretly, I liked how the rumor sounded. Love, at any age, turns you shameless. That summer she convinced me to take a train to the coast. "Let's prove adventure hasn't expired," she said. So we did. Slow trains, cheap hotels, pies too sweet for our doctor's notes. We watched teenagers dive into waves, holding hands like they'd invented affection. She leaned on my shoulder and murmured, "They think they're starting something new. We know better. Love just changes costumes." I pressed her hand. The sea answered with steady applause. Love, even kind love, tests you. One night she said, "If I go first, promise you'll still keep your kettle noisy." I stared. "Why would you say that?" "Because silence builds faster when you have something to lose." I wanted to promise eternity, but neither of us believed in forever like youngsters do. We believed in mornings. So I said, "I'll make tea for 2 anyway. You'll just be early." She smiled, approval in a single exhale. Love didn't flash or shout. It reminded me to take vitamins, laughed at my memory slips, left sticky notes that said, "We're out of milk," and excuses to be sad. We built small rituals, crossword battles, shared grocery lists, quiet reading side by side until one of us snored. Sometimes neighbors thought we were boring, but boredom shared is intimacy disguised. On my 65th birthday, she handed me an envelope. Inside, a photo of my porch from the day we met, me opening the door, her holding muffins, both of us unaware. On the back, she'd written, "You looked like a man hearing music after years of static." That line still shakes me. because it was true. When she knocked that day, my heart remembered melody. Late winter, she caught pneumonia. Hospital again. Oxygen. Sterile beeps. I sat there, useless, whispering stories to keep her awake. She opened one eye and said, "Don't pity me. If love found us once, it'll find us again somewhere." I joked, "I'll send a forwarding address." She squeezed my hand weakly. A week later, she recovered. Stronger, sassier, ordering soup recipes from the nurses. Love had cheated mortality for one more season. Spring returned, and she decided we should learn to dance again. We enrolled in a community class full of teenagers and honeymooners. Our first attempt was chaos, my knees disagreeing with rhythm, her laughter drowning out the music. But halfway through, we caught a common beat. The instructor clapped for us. "We've still got it," she whispered. And for a few minutes, age disappeared, replaced by a feeling only beginners get: wonder. One night during dinner, I said, "I wish we'd met sooner." She shook her head. "You wouldn't have seen me then. You were still running toward something. Now you've stopped long enough for me to catch up." Then she smiled, playful. "Do I look like a second chance?" I said, "More like the main act that arrived a little late on purpose." No engagement rings, no speeches, just a shared understanding that love didn't need ceremonies anymore. It already had attendance. We started a tradition. Every month, on the date we met, we wrote one line in a notebook titled "Reasons We're Still Surprised." Mine: "Her laugh makes silence jealous." Hers: "He doesn't rush the boiling kettle." Years stack differently when you measure them by gratitude instead of regret. Time doesn't run out. It settles comfortably beside you. It happened quietly. Morning rain, faint coughs, her head on my shoulder. She said, "If I don't wake up, promise you'll still eat breakfast." I whispered, "Only if I can still hear you teasing me about crumbs." She smiled, eyes half closed. I wouldn't miss that. She slept, and sometime between sunrise and my final sip of tea, love became memory, soft, complete, untiring. People told me to move on, but love isn't a race. It's a presence that adapts. Her house next door still smells like cookies each time I open the door to air it out. Sometimes I feel her around that doorway, saying, "Check the oven, you'll burn them again." I laugh out loud. My neighbors think I'm eccentric, which feels like continuity. Every knock at the door still makes my heart rehearse a welcome. Because that's what she taught me. Stays of hope are louder than departures. I used to think love had an expiration date, that at some age it stopped choosing you. But she proved me wrong. Love doesn't check your calendar. It checks if your door still opens, if your laughter still fits someone else's rhythm. It doesn't care about wrinkles, widowhood, or wasted years. It only cares that when the next knock comes, you answer with wonder instead of fear. She arrived when my story had already rolled credits. But life, clever as it is, wrote an encore. Love found me not because I chased it, but because I left the door unlatched one ordinary afternoon. And that's the secret I wish someone had told me sooner. Love doesn't check your age, only your openness. So keep the kettle ready. Keep some cookies in the oven. You never know who might knock next.